I'm Trish Davidson, and I have the great honour of being a University of Wollongong alumna and also the Dean of the Johns Hopkins School of Nursing. So both have very different traditions, but still both of these schools have amazing commitments to health and social justice. I started in Wollongong in 1976 at Wollongong Hospital, and in 1978, Lorraine, in a similar era, at that stage, nursing was based in the hospitals as a diploma program, and just at that stage, the University of Wollongong was actually one of the first pilots schools of university-based baccalaureate nursing, and I was actually sort of a student member as they developed that curriculum, and was very soon one of the foundation faculty members. So University of Wollongong is near and dear to my heart, and it's where my husband and I spent most of a good part of our years. I left Wollongong thinking I was never going to come back, and then met someone who promised me I would just be there for a year and we'd move back to Sydney, but that never happened. But Wollongong is a great place. We've had this amazing event on Tuesday night in San Francisco, and no one has won yet because I was telling the Wollongong alums that someone had an I Love the Gong t-shirt. So if anyone has got that under their shirts, please open up. But this is a really great intersection of worlds, not just countries and institutions, but it's really about innovation and thinking. And the people are here in this room are from a range of perspectives, from technology, nursing, politics, policy, law, and really that is what is needed to really solve some of the wicked problems that we have in our healthcare system. So we have a fabulous panel here tonight. First of all, we have Kristen Brown, who is one of our faculty members and directs the simulation programs for our advanced practice nursing. We have Rick Martin, who is a boy from the Gong. So he's an alumni of the University of Wollongong, a graduate in commerce and law, and a Forbes under 30 honoree, which is pretty amazing. But, he's very Australian and it just puts his head down. We have teaching him to be more American. And Dr. Ken Dion, who is our Dean for Business Development and Innovation at the School of Nursing. And also we're very honoured tonight to have Molly McCarthy with us, who's the Chief Nursing Officer for Microsoft here in the United States. So without little ado, we look forward to this panel discussion, some rich dialogue afterwards, and enjoying some light refreshments. So thanks so much for coming. And in particular, thank you to Monique and Katie and Evelyn for organising this event. I think in San Francisco already there were lots of networks sown, and I think it's these events that bring together serendipitous connections that are really meaningful and fuel innovation. So thank you so much.
Well, good evening. It's so great to be here with all of you and have the opportunity to chat with some of you before getting started here today. So as Dean Davidson said, I'm Molly McCarthy. I've been with Microsoft for 6 years in the health and life sciences industry. I've actually been in healthcare for 25 years. I started actually at Georgetown, right down the street, and have been 20 out of those 25 years I've been in technology. So happy to talk with anyone after about my career path. But today, really talking about virtual and augmented reality with our panelists here. And just to get started, I wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, to tell you more about their background and what we're going to be talking about today. So I'll start with Ken.
Ladies first.
Sorry.
Hi, thank you for coming this evening. I'm Kristen Brown. I am a pediatric critical care nurse practitioner by trade, and I have been at the bedside as a nurse for the past 17 years. I dabbled in simulation all throughout nursing, and I ended up doing a simulation fellowship through the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and which was really exciting for me because I was the first nurse to do this fellowship. It was usually reserved for physicians. So I did a 2-year simulation fellowship through the School of Medicine, and at the same time I did my DMP at Johns Hopkins. And so my work was really around studying simulation as an educational tool, specifically for advanced practice providers. So currently, in my faculty position at the School of Nursing, I'm incorporating simulation throughout all the advanced practice programs. So family nurse practitioner, pediatric nurse practitioner, clinical nurse specialist, so across the board. I also work at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine Simulation Center as the lead strategic project lead. And so I collaborate between both the School of Medicine and School of Nursing.
Hi, I'm Rick, and I'm a co-founder of Equal Reality, and we do diversity and inclusion training in virtual reality. So what that means is we create perspective-taking experiences using 3D video technology, video game technology, where you can embody and look at a virtual reflection and then go into a scenario and see what it's like to maybe experience discrimination, harassment, and then go into practice for what we call practice situations or fire drills for social interactions, such as bystander training and practicing police procedure, for example, in domestic violence situations. We work with typically HR and D&I practitioners to blend into learning initiatives. We've fallen into the learning and development market using VR tools for perspective taking in the learning environment or education environment. We also work with military as well as police.
So I'm Ken. I am, firefighter paramedic turned emergency department nurse turned IT consultant, entrepreneur, and academic. I think I covered all of them. And you know, it was really interesting. I had a fascination for technology since the time I was young. Always dabbled in it, played with it myself. There was a point at which my programmer said, okay, that's enough. You got to quit writing code because you're just not a coder. And I said, okay, time for me to move on and do something else. But actually, my interest in VR started when I was in graduate school in 1993. I did a joint MSN MBA at the University of Texas at Austin, and then went to work for a consulting firm implementing and selecting electronic medical records. Realized we had all of this data about our patients, but we knew literally nothing practically about the people who were taking care of them. And for the nurses in the audience, you've probably heard of synergy theory and matching the right nurse with the right patient to optimize outcomes. Thought, wow, we probably ought to start collecting this data. So I started a software company to do that, which was later acquired by another company. I was trying to mind my own business for a little while, which is very difficult for me to do. And so I went all the way to Colorado to do it and was hiding on a mountain when Dean Davidson called me and said, would you consider coming to Johns Hopkins? Now, you have to realize that for a guy who never graduated high school to wind up with a PhD and have an offer to come to Johns Hopkins, you know, my response was, well, Dean Davidson, have you even looked at my CV? It's not a Hopkins CV. And she said, yes, and that's exactly why I want you to come to Johns Hopkins. We're ready to do some fun and innovative things, and who could say no to that? So I'm actually the inaugural Dean for Business Innovation and Strategic Relationships at Johns Hopkins. And thank you for pulling me off the mountain, Dean Davidson.
That's great. I think that's important in healthcare, as Dean Davidson said, and just getting different perspectives, being more diverse. I know that at Microsoft, we're big pushers on and believers in inclusive behavior, as well as diverse in our hiring, and also just in terms of who's developing and deploying and testing our platforms. Before we get started on the discussion, I did want to just share with you one quick video just to spark some interest in, again, not only how technology is being used in healthcare, but other areas as well. So, because I think within healthcare, we can learn from other industries, manufacturing, airline industry, et cetera. So I'm just going to play this. It's 2 minutes.
Our world evolves around us at ever-increasing speed. So for us, changing to meet our customers' expectations is a non-stop activity and something that we relish.
CA is a global training company in civil aviation, defense and security, and in healthcare. We operate in fields where the stakes are high and where teamwork is important.
The power of CA is our employees, and we got to give them the best tools that promote collaboration and enhance productivity. The fact that we can use the cloud allows our employees to do more. We really have unlocked unlimited scalability, and that's extremely powerful.
At CA, we want to objectively assess human performance. We're leveraging artificial intelligence to identify trends and to provide training that's adaptive and personalized.
For example, the way pilots are assessed throughout the world is still done in a very subjective way. But now, by leveraging the data that our simulators are giving us, powered by the Internet of Things, we can give an objective assessment and unique insights to our customers.
The first time that we saw HoloLens, we knew right away that this was going to transform education and training. The human body is extremely complex. These structures that make up a human body are 3D, are dynamic. It's very difficult to explain that using a textbook. For me, the magic is to leverage these kinds of technologies that are really immersive.
At CAE, we like to partner with the best.
So I'm just going to cut it off there because I don't want to be a commercial. And I think that, again, one of the kind of mind-opening things for me being at Microsoft as it's a technology company, so I get to interact with other industries. And I think, that's something important as we move through our discussion today to consider. But I'm just wondering to kind of kick off our questions. So we're going to have some questions for our panelists, and then we'll have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions too. And then I guess Dean Davidson said there's a test. Oh, you were just kidding. Okay, there's no test. Don't worry. The question is, who's the winemaker over there? So I'm just curious to hear from our panel tonight in terms of what is the current state of virtual reality, considering augmented reality, mixed reality, and then I'm just going to throw in there artificial intelligence. So what are you guys seeing from your perspective? And I'll just open it up to whoever would like to answer first.
I think right now there's a lot going on, and you can see out there in the market, everybody's promoting VR, AI, AR. And I think it's exciting, and I think these are all tools. Mm-hmm. And so as a sim educator, I'm very mindful of using this tool in a very thoughtful manner, because again, if you don't implement it in such a way that you're changing behavior, you're just playing with a toy. So as a sim educator, I think it's really important to think about what principles will guide our use of this technology and how do we apply it to make our learners more competent. I think what the shift is happening right now is that we're going to online education, as you know, and so there's a big push for nurses and advanced practice providers to do their schooling through an online platform, which is great. But again, we're delivering a lot of content, and there's content. Well, we had to shift from content to competency. Mm-hmm. And so in doing so, we use simulation as a tool. And right now we're using mannequins, we're using standardized patients. But I think eventually we'll move to a world where we are doing full VR. I don't think we're quite there yet, mm-hmm. because I don't think the hand haptics are as such. I don't think that we are at a level that we can fully change behaviors, but we're almost there. Mm-hmm. And I think if you apply it the right way, we'll be there a lot sooner than, probably in the next 5 to 10 years.
Great.
I think it's helpful to also define each of these, what is VR, what is augmented reality, and what is AI. I think they're actually all the same thing, and I'll tell you why. So I see artificial intelligence thrown around a lot. It's a really broad term. What does that actually mean? I personally see it as the cognification of any system. So a calculator could, it's smart enough to be an AI, but we usually use AI as a neural networking, machine learning, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. For example, virtual reality and augmented reality, these digital technologies are also just different forms of AI. It's just the visual computing systems that are part of this AI spectrum. And that goes to the point of, okay, what's virtual and augmented reality as I see it? It's a spectrum. It's a description of a technology at this stage, and I mentioned on Tuesday night that virtual reality, the original use of that language was from French theatre in the 1800s, which was, what does virtual reality mean? It's an approximate reality or something close to the actual as is. And we use it now to define a digital reality, a digital creation of reality. And augmented and virtual reality is just simply a spectrum. So when you think of virtual reality, it's simply the complete immersion and creation of augmenting all of your senses to a virtual reality. And it's not actually a virtual reality. It's not actually simulating every sense of your body. It's really just a visual and audio system with a bit of haptics. So it's not really doing your smell yet. It could, but we use the full digital visual system to define or describe virtual reality. We see that as the absolute, complete digital spectrum. And when you define augmented reality right down on the other end, it's just part of this environment that we're in that is augmented. So we usually use that to describe glasses that you might see through and see the whole world, but maybe it's giving you a digital object or asset to contextualize your environment. And that's only a partial digital simulation. So as you can see, they're all related, but it's all a part of a spectrum, and I think that's helpful.
So to know where you are, it's sometimes helpful to know where you came from. And it's funny, we used to have a saying around the fire department, when you give a guy a white shirt, which means he becomes a manager, he forgot where he came from. And that was one of the things I said I would never do, is forget where I came from. And interestingly enough for me, Molly, your video could not have been more timely. And I got to tell you, I did not see the video before I sat in this chair this evening.
I sent you the link. You didn't watch it?
I thought you were going to let me slide on that one. Okay.
Sorry.
No. But so when I was in nursing school, I was actually exposed to Dr. Pat Benner's novice to expert work. And it's really guided a lot of my career. And it wasn't intentional, actually. But I agree with Kristen's point about competency, right? And we live in a very compliance-driven industry, and that drives so much of what we do. But compliance doesn't move the needles on outcomes. Competency does. And the airline video is just that. I mean, Dr. Benner's work came from, actually, I think it was in about the early 1940s, planes started dropping out of the sky. And we were losing our best pilots because you couldn't just jump in a plane and fly it anymore like you used to. It was way too complex. We needed checklists, and we needed to make sure that people were competent to fly the plane so they weren't dying. And Dr. Benner adapted that work in the airline industry, which I think, for those who like quotes, was the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition, and she brought it to the novice to expert model. And it really was about competency. And so if we want to move the needle on competency, that means focusing on these other things, that it's not check off a checklist, take a test. You know, how do we really measure competency? You know, what data can we now gather in an objective fashion and really look for patterns in those things? So for me, you know, like I said, I've always had a passion about this, and to Molly's question about where are we, I wrote my first paper on VR in 1993. Okay, so I'm dating myself. We really haven't made a lot of progress until probably the last 5 years. It's really taken off, where it's a technology that can be another tool in our toolkit, and we can really move from that model of compliance to a model of competency using tools like this, because we can now get our hands around both what the individual is doing when they're being educated, and then capture that data on the back end, not only for the benefit of that individual, but so we can adapt our teaching and the methodologies that we're using to actually impact competency. And that's so exciting to me.
Actually, I just want to touch on that point. It's really important around the timing of why this question around virtual reality is important. So in Stanford, they had a human interaction lab. The system would cost, I think 6 years ago, about $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up. And that same quality of system now costs them $300. And as of 2016, we sort of saw the industry completely change with the release of Oculus Rift, which is now owned by Facebook, and also HTC Vive, and there's all these new emerging technologies. And this year, just last month, we were talking about the Oculus Quest for the virtual reality industry, which has just been released, which removes the need for a computer. So a $2,000 system now is $400, which is, it's changing and sort of, like I said, progressing up the exponential curve.
Right, that's a great point. I think, as we think about these specific technologies, I'm just wondering from within, specific to nursing, Kristen, what have you seen that's been implemented in this field that's been successful along the lines of, for simulation, whether it's a robot or augmented reality? What examples have you seen be successful?
And that's a great question. And I think what makes something successful is, I'm going back to this experiential learning where you're changing behavior. So any technology that you're implementing that changes behavior is successful. So I think about, if as a sim educator, all of the education, most of it takes place in the debriefing. So that human interaction with the participant, to talk about what they did, to have them understand the behavior, and then you can modify that behavior. I always think about, when I'm teaching nurses, about what drug to choose for heart failure. Okay, they pick the right drug. Well, tell me why. Maybe they can't tell me why, but in sim, I can pull that from them. I want them to understand why, and that way they feel empowered when they're on the unit and someone asks them a question or someone orders the wrong drug. They're like, I'm questioning this. I understand why, instead of pattern recognition. So it goes back to this competency. So, I think we use many tools, and I think as technology evolves, it's going to make things even easier. We were just talking on the way in about some of the simulations that I've done that involve hours of prep. You're moulaging or creating this realism or this high fidelity for the learners, and it takes hours to prep. I mean, you're intubating a patient, you're putting chest tubes in the mannequin, you're doing all this stuff, and Ken had mentioned today, wouldn't it be nice to just press a reset button, not only for the ease of doing this, but the space and the cost that's involved with this. So currently, some of the things that we are utilizing, we're using telepresence robots to allow simulation experience from off-site. So we have our learners that are around the country, they're coming in for simulations, and they're coming in and they're able to participate in the sim. We debrief them. They're actually controlling the robot from their end. It doesn't take any special app. It's browser-based. And you just send them a link, and they steer it, and they can participate in the simulation. So again, I think any technology that's going to be out there that's going to allow me to change behavior and to facilitate learning is going to be something that is interesting to me. And I think augmented reality has a great role in realism, because in a very simplistic way, even using an iPhone or an iPad, I can overlay an image. And so again, in my simulated experiences, if I need to overlay a rash or if I need to overlay some element to make it more real, I can do that. So any of these tools that's going to make this learning environment more real and change the behavior is the ultimate goal.
Great. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that, or...
Can you just remind me the exact question?
So just thinking about it within nursing, what have you seen technologies deployed around VR, AI, et cetera, that have been successful in changing practice and really the education?
I mean, I can't speak to nursing specifically, but what we're doing in other industries. And,
okay, I think that's important.
And Kristen's point about this is not to replace existing systems of learning. This is about augmenting tasks to make the high value more of the task of the human sort of element of it better or easier, or that's what you spend your time doing, rather than the other things like prepping a mannequin or spending a lot of money and time and space taking up areas and resource. So we also found that, which is really important, the quality of the debrief actually is very correlated to the quality of the technology itself, or the perceived quality of the technology. So we found that, priming people to understand the objectives of learning when they use these technologies, and the debrief and understanding and talking about the follow-up, the touch points, the continual objective to reinforce the learnings over a period of time actually increased the perceived quality of the actual simulation technology itself. So the two go hand in hand, and they cannot be isolated. It's and it's also going to solving a problem as well. What is the objective of that technology? What is it used for?
Right. Yeah, and Kristen, when you were speaking, I was just thinking about your question of asking why, just the utmost importance of the critical thinking skills combined with that human touch. I don't think we'll ever replace any type of tech.
Well, and I think it's important, it goes back to learning objectives. What are your learning objectives and how do I meet them? And what are my tools to meet those? And to kind of further answer your question, there have been some studies, and Boise State just published one using virtual reality, using hand haptics for Foley insertion. So they can repetitively practice putting in the Foley and not use sterile equipment over and over and over again, so it reduces costs. And something like that, the automated feedback is, I think, sufficient to say, did you maintain sterile field? I don't know that you would need faculty to coach. You could probably do some video review after. So I think that type of implementation at this point is really exciting, because you're going to save money and you're going to allow that kind of psychomotor kind of skills over and over again for the learner. So I think there's definitely some things that are being implemented in nursing, and like I said before, within the next 5 years, we're really going to up the ante.
So, successes. I think we're still early days, and there aren't a lot of them out there. So I'm going to do what I always do and pose the contra case and talk about failures for a minute. I was in the electronic medical records world before the word informatics was really used frequently. And I don't think our electronic medical records are doing us the service that they should be in all of the efficiencies that they promised us, right? And we're spending more time treating the computer than we are treating our patients, and that's why we got into nursing in the first place. And it's that nurse-to-patient interaction that does move HCAHPS scores, right? It's those sorts of things, and those have not given us the time back at the bedside that was promised. Why? Because nurses were not involved in the development and implementation of these tools in many, many cases. And I think that that's the important piece as we're looking at these technologies, is this is the time for nursing to be at the table. Because with tools like RICS, we had a conversation the other evening about, well, can you teach someone empathy? I'll leave that question alone for the minute. But I do know that people who are drawn to this profession are naturally empathetic and compassionate. So if we can use tools like this to up their game on that, then that's a worthwhile investment. Certainly, are they going to be useful in guiding procedures and those sorts of things? Absolutely. But if we can use these to improve the quality of nursing care, and it was funny because we were out in the San Francisco area where there are a lot of tech people, and one of our colleagues was there, and he even mentioned I was at a meeting with him. And I said, well, Jonathan, do you know why people go to the hospital? He's like, no, Ken, what do you got for me? It's like nursing care. Right? That's why people go to the hospital. And who is closer to every process and everything that goes on in the hospital or the clinic, or quite frankly, and we had the discussion about all the things we can do, and we'll get there from cradle to grave with technologies like this. Who needs to lead the way in this? Nursing, because that's really where the vast opportunities are for improving our healthcare systems. The procedural-based things, we've got the evidence-based practice around those things. It's how do we fix all of these other things that are broken in our system? And that's bringing the right tools to the table. And so, if we're involved in this, it's not going to be, and one of my engineer friends said the other day, we invent something, and then we go look for a problem to solve with it. And I said to him, we've got plenty of problems. We'll help you. Let us point you in the right direction, and let's work together. And so I think that, where are we? Back to your question, early days. But what's in front of us? A lot of opportunity, and we need to take advantage of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think, 6 years ago when I came into this role, I work with many different health systems across the country and actually around the world, but I wouldn't say they were so eager to partner with tech companies, but really the tide has turned. We're doing a lot of work with Hopkins. I didn't prepare a video for that, but around precision medicine with 9 different areas that we're working with, including prostate cancer and a few others, ALS. But I think, to your point, partnership and kind of, that diving in together to solve the problem, because no one is going to solve it alone. And to your point earlier, Ken and Kristen, thinking about nurses' role, it's so critical, and I say this wherever I go, but they need to be involved in the design, development, and deployment of technology in order for it to be adopted. So that's really couple things out of that. One, that it really opens up, I think, opportunities for nurses in general in terms of where we will work in the future. It won't necessarily just be in a hospital, in a clinic, or even in academia, but other areas. And I don't want to go too much off on a tangent about that, but I think it's to that perspective, to that end. When we think about virtual reality? How do you think that it will, and not just virtual reality, but technology in general, how will it really change the way that we as organizations, as individuals, learn, but then also grow and look for these types of new roles? So I'm just wondering what you guys have seen out there.
There's a few thoughts I have on that. The first thought that comes to my mind is, what should we be doing with technology? How should we be thinking about it? And you mentioned, you touched on the point of who's building the technology.
Right.
And I think, nurses do need to be involved in this, and we need to have diverse, we sort of say we do diversity inclusion training, but we want to get diverse perspectives to build the technology itself. Because if we don't solve problems, and perhaps we run the risk of creating tech for tech's sake or using tech for tech's sake. And, sometimes organizations might build a technology and see what sticks when they throw it at a wall. And one of the things that I've noticed time and time again, often dealing with different industries, is this bias. I sort of say I'm not a tech person, that's not my thing. Which I think is actually a dangerous thought, because who's then building the technology? If you're not going to get involved with your diverse perspective and your way and solve your problems, then who's going to be solving them for you, or trying to at least? And that's what I think super important around how we think about the actual creation and the evolution of these technologies and where it goes. And it touches on your point of where do I see specifically virtual reality going in education. I think a great acronym for this, is I think it's called DICE. So anything that's dangerous, for virtual reality, anything that's impossible, we literally will get you to become someone else that you could never be otherwise. And there's a lot of research around why that's an important thing around embodiment. It's costly. It's just expensive. Medical equipment, maybe out in a certain place that at a university, for example, that you couldn't have otherwise. You could simulate that. Or it's just like impractical type thing, or an emergency environment, sort of say a natural disaster or something like that you need to recreate. These are sort of a great set of principles, but they're high value tasks that are solving problems with the technology, and I think that's a great framework to at least as to how we push at least virtual reality technology, and there's a whole new set of them for augmented but related.
And I think this goes to the global impact that this can have. I could be in Baltimore, and I could be educating learners in China, in Baltimore, in DC, across the world. And to be able to engage in a learning environment is amazing. And I also think of it, you don't want to be center-centric. You don't want to just say, well, this is the Hopkins way, this is how we do it. But wouldn't it be nice if we're collaborating with our colleagues from across the world, and you're getting different perspectives on educating? And so I think that's going to be a major implication in how we deliver healthcare and how we educate. Mm-hmm. You will no longer have to be present. You will be able to be wherever you are working and living, and I think that's what's really important, at least especially for my role in advanced practice. we don't want to take people away from the bedside. They're working as RN. So how do we get them to go on for further education while they maintain their job? And online education is the way. And so this is just another tool, the virtual reality, that will be able to connect us when we're teaching.
So implications for nursing, and I kind of touched on it, cradle to grave. On a personal note, my grandmother took me to the planetarium when I was about 5 years old. And that immersive experience that I had just had such a huge impact on me as a child. And I have followed space all my life. Of course, I was down here last week on the mall when they were doing the 50th anniversary of the moonshot. Wasn't going to miss that. But it made a big impression on me. And when I'm thinking about this technology, I'm thinking about school nurses. What if a school nurse could be with a child in a virtual world, standing in the middle of a heart, and say, okay, this is how the heart works. But you know what? This is what happens to the heart when you smoke crack cocaine, and it changed right there in front of them. Or this is what happens when you smoke cigarettes. And have that impact on a child. Talk about changing behavior. That would be absolutely amazing. And then I think at the other end of the spectrum, there's already a lot of work going on in geriatrics and the aging population, and how wonderful this stimulation is for them. And, they can't go to the Grand Canyon anymore, but they can experience the Grand Canyon and have the memories from when they were there, because they can have that virtual experience. And then the implications for nursing research are huge, from the basic how are we doing in training people to how are we going to deal with addiction to virtual reality, because it's going to come, and who is going to have to deal with that? It's going to be the nurses. So we better understand this technology, and not only the implications for our own profession, but the implications for society as a whole.
That's a great point. So kind of just expanding upon that a little bit, the hazards, I guess. What are your thoughts around using virtual reality in education, and does it impact or exacerbate the dehumanization of care? What are your thoughts around, and we can expand it beyond just virtual reality, but obviously nursing, healthcare is a high-touch profession. So what are your thoughts around that?
Again, going back to my sim roots, I think you have to maintain not having an individual learner by themselves in a virtual world. There will be some application if especially the RICS technology is amazing, where someone is putting their self, they are the simulated environment. Like, what's important about that sim is that they are becoming someone else. And so when you're doing something like that and you're exploring that, that's an individual type of thing. But I think what we need to do to maintain, communication skills, to learn about teamwork. I mean, these are things that we don't work in silos, and we should not teach in silos. What we need to do is make sure that you have multiplayer virtual reality, but you also need a facilitator. I keep harping on this, but if you give people a tool and that no one knows how to use it, it's not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. So you would need to be someone in that virtual network or in that virtual world, helping to change behaviors, helping to modify, helping to teach and educate. So I think if you do it in a way that it's multiplayer and there's teams of people working together, just like a sim when you go in the world, it's not real. You ask people to suspend disbelief. Well, in this world, it's going to be even more believable, and the fidelity is going to be even greater, but you're asking them to play along. But again, I think you still need to have that educator, and you need to work in teams.
I mean, I'm working in the space it goes back to that point of who's building the technology and what are we building it for? And I think that's the important thing to consider. You talk about, technology takes away our humanity. Well, we're trying to use it for a way to maybe increase humanity in a way, and understand empathy and behavior towards others. And we need to think about who's building this technology. Is it going to be 100 more virtual reality games around killing people, or is it going to be about something else? Mm-hmm. And solving a different problem that can be solved with this technology. So I think it goes straight back to that point of how do we think about this technology? How do we build it inclusively? Who are we helping to serve here? And what have we got to think about in the creation of this new industry and this new technology for education? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's important. We were chatting before we convened up here about a case where at Microsoft, quite frankly, we had a team of developers putting together one of the controllers. You know the story better than I do. And it wasn't a diverse group actually making it. And so when they went out to test it on women and children, it wasn't successful. It wouldn't work with that particular age group. So, we've had to do some soul searching within our organization to ensure that, we're really diversifying who we bring in from that engineering perspective as well.
Yeah, and we've got one really interesting story around inclusive design. So we're working with Cornell at the moment on this diversity and inclusion module, and the person who's the visionary behind this and creating it, her name's Angela. She's blind, and she's using her life experiences, and we need to build a completely visual system, which is also auditory, for her to be able to use. And we're using it, she can't see in 3D space, so she can't touch the options when in our experiences you need to choose an answer. That's how we've done the interaction before. But now we have to completely rethink about how do we make this more inclusive for her. And we have to start using 3D sound, which this system provides, so she can be guided by sound better than she probably could be in the real world. And then we have to do voice interaction as opposed to 3D, like touching interaction. And these are the sort of things that we need to think about. But if we didn't have her involved in building this technology, it would never happen. And then that whole part of society would never be included in the development of this technology ever, and unless someone's going to do it. And I think that's a great example of what I mean by this, who's building the technology.
Yeah, can do.
That's okay. I think the question was around the dehumanization of our profession in the course of using this technology. And I think that not only this technology as a whole, we have to embrace it as a profession and be part of it. I mean, I watched nurses exit the profession when we implemented the first EMRs, because they're like, no, I don't want to know about that. And now we have patients walking in the door that know more about their disease process than we do, because they've got all day to be on the internet and study it when they walk in the door. We need to know the technologies that they're using and be willing to embrace them. And it's not just VR. I mean, the robots are coming, folks. And how do we be involved in those implementations so that they're not taking over our jobs, but instead I'm at the patient bedside and the robot goes to the supply room and fetches things for me based on the procedure that I'm doing, and I'm comfortable with that. Our roles have changed throughout the history of our profession. There are things we do today that were only in the domain of physicians. We're restarting our CRNA program at Johns Hopkins. We have nurses delivering care in places where you can't have a physician, who are taking care of problems with chronic pain. A lot of that technology is going to be helping with. So we have to be willing to embrace it, no matter what it is, and we need to be involved not only in the development, but also in the selection process. To your point, Molly, we have to be able to say and dig in our heels and say, no, that's not going to work for us. It's going to make our job harder. So you can, and we all know that nurses are burnt out on, here's the next technology you're going to have to use, right? We've hit the wall on technologies. So if it's not going to be something that is going to enhance our practice and get us back to why we were drawn to this profession in the first place, to care for our patients. And I have to get in a little plug here because it was just really funny. Someone always asked me, well, Ken, why did you not become a physician? I said, well, that was easy. Physicians get to treat diseases, no offense to my physician friends, and we get to treat patients and their families as nurses. And that's what technology needs to do for us, needs to enhance our ability to do that no matter what the technology is.
And just to that point, I think if we think about traditional learning, I mean, you think about someone up at a lecture and PowerPoint and everybody sitting in a room, not everybody can learn like that. Most adult learners don't learn like that. We know that. We know that you sit there and you're saturated after 8 minutes. So actually, technology can be a really good thing for people that learn differently. It's multimodal. You can learn asynchronously. You're at home. You're doing modules at your own pace. You're doing videos. You're reading. You're interacting. So I think, even though people oh my gosh, we're going to lose this human contact by going to like an online platform, I actually think it evens the playing field for people with different styles of learning. And, just because we've done this for hundreds of years doesn't mean it was always the right way. It's just that was the way to mass educate people. And so now we're learning that we can still connect, we can interact, and we just need to use the tools and the technology that will allow us to interact with our colleagues and our faculty.
I'd just like to make a follow-on point to Kristen's point, because you bring up a really good point. What do we all remember? It's not our successes, it's our failures. Those are the things we really learn from, right? So now we can take students and graduates and people across the spectrum and put them in a safe environment where they can fail. And they're going to learn from that, and it's going to change their behavior. Unlike, don't even want to think about the days that we were drawing blood on each other back when I was in nursing school back in the day. Now we can do this in ways where we don't have to subject each other or our patients to our trial and error or getting better about practicing the art of nursing. We can use the technology to help enhance our art as a profession.
There's actually some numbers behind this as well from research. So learning by doing is the top of the triangle, and down the bottom is slides and presentations. And it's like something like 10% you'll remember of these slides and presentations, and over 75% if you've done it. And that's where this difference comes in with something that can simulate so you can do something and fail.
This is why I love sim. I mean, my sim educators out there, you guys know this. I mean, that's where you learn, you apply. I wish I could I teach pathophysiology. I wish I could just do all sim for that. I mean, because that's how people are going to learn. 160 students, it's a little tricky, so you have to be creative, but that's how we learn. And using different techniques of debriefing, and what we originally thought, where you would do a sim, you debrief, and you walk out, and you're like, oh my gosh, I learned so much. Well, we found out not really. You'd learn something, but you have to do it again. Or there's different methodologies. We use something called rapid cycle deliberate practice. Is a teaching technology where during the simulation you pause and you reset and you give them tools to do something better. And so when things like time to task are crucial, and time to reacting, start chest compressions or doing defibrillation, if you do it in a simulated environment and you don't get on the chest and start compressions in 10 seconds and a machine's telling you wrong, well, how's that going to change your behavior? But if you have someone there educating you, telling you, use closed loop communication. I don't feel pulse, I'm starting compressions, or work with your team, navigating and pausing and redoing. So it's doing the cognitive and the psychomotor skills over and over again, and that's how we learn. So, if we could simulate everything, it would be great. But this is where it goes back. That's why VR is so exciting, because we will be able to do it in a low-cost way. Once we get to the point where it's a tool that will allow us to do this, we could simulate most of our classes in that type of environment. It'll be amazing.
I want to be mindful of our time.
I'm sorry, you just had me about my passion, but just very quickly.
Everyone has 1 minute lightning round.
So one of the challenges that we have, right, is throughput in the nursing profession. We can't produce enough nurses fast enough for the silver tsunami that's ahead of us. And there's
the silver tsunami.
You like that? I can say that.
I'm going to use that. I like that.
And it's really important, and it's important that we produce competent nurses quickly, right? So with this technology, we can do that. And you look at the ability to put people in simulation. I read something the other day that a student will learn as much in 30 minutes in a VR environment as they will in 2 hours in a textbook. So we really can improve our throughput time using technologies like that. In our curriculum, we really haven't scratch the surface of what we're legally allowed to do in terms of putting people through simulation. But as the tools develop and we demonstrate that we're getting the outcomes using the technology, it's really going to impact our profession in a positive way and society in a positive way. I think that was my minute.
Who wants to go next? Any closing thoughts before we open it up for questions from the group and food and beverage?
I think we as a collective whole, as nurses, educators, whatever you do, technology is coming, like Ken said, and we have to embrace it. But I don't think we should not be fearful. We just have to look at a way to do it that's going to really change the way we learn. And so, again, I think this will empower a whole entire group of people to be able to collaborate, to interact with each other. And, I can work with my GW colleagues and we can be in a sim together and we can learn from each other. And so I think this is such a powerful tool. But again, you have to be able to use the tool and you have to have people, educators, that know how to use the tool to make it successful.
The one point I really want to make is we're taught in entrepreneurship that you can't have impact if you don't have scale. Mm-hmm. So yes, VR has all these powerful things that it can do and solve problems, and it's about getting it right and working with the people to make this great technology. But the beauty about technology is that you can have scale. So let's say we do get a great piece of content in this virtual reality world, it just can go anywhere, especially as the technology becomes cheaper, it becomes more ubiquitous, it is everywhere, and then we can have real impact. And that's at the end of the day what this is about, and it will hit like a tidal wave as you go up further up that exponential curve, it will really start to change things. So I think, yes, it's early days now, but thinking about this is important. And from my perspective of what's happening in this industry, now is the right time to start thinking about this.
Great, thank you so much. Just a round of applause for our panelists. And then I just want to open it up to questions. I believe that there's a microphone.
You were talking about measuring outcomes, and I was just interested in how specifically you're measuring outcomes. Are there validated scales, especially for the person in the middle? Like if you're looking at measuring empathy, is there a specific validated empathy tool that you're using? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a tough one, but what we've done is, the reason why we kind of started this company was based off research from 20 years of VR research at Stanford Human Interaction Labs at Barcelona University as well, around perspective taking in VR and why it was better than traditional learning, such as reading case scenarios, hearing case scenarios, or doing a role play acting. And across the board, their measurements showed that VR was more successful at creating empathy to motivate behavior change and change behaviors at the end of the day. And then also retention. The numbers around retention are easier to explain and measure. But with that, we kind of copied their methodology, and we used Mel Sharp's. We just really copied theirs and used it in the corporate context. Mel Sharp is the leading researcher at Barcelona University around this, and it's about did I identify that person? Did I? And we asked all these series of questions, and then we ask around behavior change, like whether they understand what they needed to do, then would they be motivated to do it? And then obviously we want to do longitudinal studies around that. But largely, I don't take credit. We didn't come up with this. We just copied what they've done, and we've implemented in a corporate context. And we're still evolving, and we're starting to measure new things now that maybe the research didn't think about, that we're seeing as being needed, and different objectives with every organization that we work with. But yes, absolutely.
And I think what's exciting for me as a researcher will be the data that you can collect in real time. So I look at time to task elements in simulation. Are there certain things that I want the learner to touch upon? If I could have that built in where it can measure that time and give me a printout. Right now I have students going and looking at the video data and annotating it, and it's a painful process. So I think one of the things will be the automated data that you can collect from using a virtual system. But also, if you think about it, anything you utilize in sim to evaluate, this is still another tool, another simulated tool. So you could look at measures that you use in any simulation to apply to the VR as well. There's also a system usability scale for looking at technology. So any new technology, that's a validated tool as well. And so they're out there. There's not a lot specific to VR, but again, if you have like AHA guidelines and you want to see if they were able to do that in the sim, you could apply that concept as well.
So for me, again, it goes back to that idea of competency. One of the things that I was involved in my entrepreneurial journey, we started with a learning management system, and that just captures quantitative data. And eventually, we developed a professional portfolio where the nurses could actually collect artifacts like videos from being in the sim lab, like letters from families, where you get that 360-degree view of a nurse as a professional. I think where we are again is early days. We're measuring things like time to task. But I think with time, we are going to be able to make measurements and look at things that really, one of my things that just drives me crazy, we talk about the art and science of nursing. I talked to my students about this morning. No, it's the science and art of nursing. We teach you the science in nursing school, and with time and practice, you begin to practice the art of nursing. And I think with time, with tools like this, we will be able to develop validated tools that will actually measure competency rather than just compliance with the ability to do a task.
There's actually one problem that we've seen with the new technology is that we're collecting data that's never been collected before, and we don't know what to do with it. So we can collect and no, that's exactly the point. It's like we need to work with the people who understand what to do with that data. So we can collect everything that anyone ever says, or how they move, or where they're looking at, which we do. Who they're looking at for how long, and versus how long they're talking. You can't do that in real time and get and we just don't know what to do with it. We can collect the height of every single person that's ever gone through it, but we don't know what to do with it.
But also, I think it's important to think about knowledge. Did knowledge increase? I implemented some. I pre-test, something as basic as that. Was what I implemented, was it successful? And then did they retain knowledge? I mean, so there, even if there isn't a tool specific to VR that might meet your needs for evaluating it, you can always look at, was this better than another technology that you're using to teach?
All right. My name is Reginald Bannerin. I work here in D.C. at Children's Hospital. I went to Hopkins undergrad and grad school. So we recently worked on a suicide tool, the CSSR, Columbia Severity Rating Scale. And we took it from paper, built it into the EMR. We just went live May, and we're about to roll it out to the whole of the house. And I agree with you that sometimes it is a bit of a challenge because, like me, I have the clinical experience, and we know exactly what we want. And sometimes we talk to folks and we tell them, hey, this is what we want you to build. But when you look at the product and what is built at the final product, because I'm not a coder or I can't write software, right, to do exactly what I want. But collaborating with them makes a big difference. So now we're able to collect, like you said, we have a lot of data. Actually, we're going to get published very soon. Taking this tool that has never been in the EMR before. And our goal is to go throughout the whole hospital probably within the next 6 months. Every kid that comes through will be screened for suicide. And the data within 2.5 months, the data that we've already gotten, it's incredible. How many are high risk, how many are medium risk and lower risk, and how many doesn't even qualify at all. So I think the collaboration is really important. The ability to bring the two parties together to be able to work is incredible.
Yeah, I think that's great. I know that you guys use Cerner there, and I know that they have so many people there integrated, so I think that's great that you can do that.
We're very, very fortunate that we actually have a partnership with Cerner. So one of their incubators throughout the United States, one of a few. So we have them there, actually working. So from the time we say we want to design, this is what it looks like at a drawing board, and then of course they have to go behind the scenes and build, and then bring it back for testing. But the clinicians are still at the table, with the input and the feedback until everything goes live. And even when you go live, there are still issues that you have to still sort out.
So have you deployed it yet, or you have?
Live.
Okay,
we're live, and the data that is coming out is phenomenal. Actually, we're collaborating with some folks at Hopkins.
Okay.
Because we're using that to pre-screen and then also use it as a preventive measures. And as you know, Joint Commission just came out July 1 that almost everyone has to be screened. I recently went to my doctor's office and I was screened for depression.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations.
Thank you for sharing. And you brought up a really interesting point that we haven't touched on directly. we're talking about how much data we're getting, and we haven't mentioned machine learning yet in this, and this is also going to change our worlds. The pattern recognition that we're going to be able to do and to be able to anticipate things is just going to be amazing. But a friend of mine's son actually works as an annotator, one of those jobs that didn't even exist 20 years ago, right? And he found out the other day what he's actually was doing was teaching the machine to learn the difference between a military ship and a commercial ship, right? So early days, we're going to have a lot of heavy lifting to do to help the machine learning. It doesn't learn on its own. It's going to need our expertise. But if we're willing to do that heavy lifting, we're going to have a very, very valuable tool in our toolkit that is really going to change our practice and help us significantly as nurses, again, making us more efficient ultimately, that promise of efficiency that we're supposed to get from technology so we can get back to being with our patients. So collecting data is important. What's more important is turning it into information that we can make actionable.
And I think, too, we had this discussion on Twitter today with the Future of Nursing 2030. There's a meeting next week in Seattle. It's a town hall, high touch to high tech. But even to the point about the models and the machine learning, creating a workforce that is able to train those models and participate in that design has to be a diverse workforce. It can't just be, it needs to be, to your point, we have to be involved in that in order for it to actually produce something that's valuable. Any other questions? And if you need to get a drink, please.
Hi, Bruce Boom, and I'm also from Hopkins, and I appreciate the shout out about the CRNA program that we're getting ready to launch. And we're excited about how machine learning may be able to detect subtleties in the patient's change that we may not be able to detect from the human experience. So I think we're excited about that technology. What I'd like to hear a little bit of discussion about are the ethics of this technology. What are the ethical implications? Rick, you've talked about two things. One, the vast amount of information that we're able to collect. Who owns that information, and what are we going to do with it? And then two, you also talked about how a lot of the gaming technology and the violence that was there was where a lot of this technology was born. And so what are those ethical implications? I read on Twitter today about some of the hidden learning that happens in simulation where we may actually be teaching unconscious biases to learners and promoting stereotypes. And we need to think about that, and there are definitely ethical implications that I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I read that as well. And it's something in sim we think about too, because in the old days of simulation, you would try to throw the learner off, and you would play the mean anesthesiologist coming in and trying to intubate while you're doing chest compressions. Well, what does that do for stereotypes? What does that do to a new nurse that doesn't know? I don't work with an anesthesiologist, but I know when they come in, they're mean and they're pushy, or the surgeon that comes in. So I think, to your point, much like any other education we do, we have to be really mindful to not skew and not to, develop and create a learning environment that will persuade someone to think negatively towards someone else. And so, and that's a really great point. And I think, VR and people want to develop it so quickly. And again, we keep talking about the content expert. It goes back to having the content expert, because if I'm developing a scenario that I am out of my scope, I don't do it. I go to the content expert to develop that scenario, and I help them from a sim standpoint, because they may be aware of things, the subtleties that you are not. So I think it's important to utilize your content expert, but also really be mindful. I think it's an excellent point.
I love that question. I think it's such a great question and really important to talk about. I think the best way to explain it is just a story. So we're in this industry, we started a few years ago, and it's really just at the very genesis of it. And we know in terms of media, there's not good representation of diverse people and diverse things and thought. And And it affects how we perceive the world, and there's biases that are created from it. It's really important. And we already started seeing that in the virtual reality industry, in the video game industry. Like, for example, we needed characters. We need characters because we do human simulations. We couldn't find anything that wasn't a white man. Couldn't. There was hundreds of characters that were white men. We're like, okay, well, we need to solve this problem first of all, because that's all there is. And we needed characters. We needed women. We needed all types. We needed people in wheelchairs. We needed to create wheelchairs. And so we had to do it ourselves. And as a consequence, now from the beginning, I really do believe that you have to get this right at the start, because solving backwards is going to cause a lot of issues. And there's so many things. That's just one example amongst a plethora of issues. But once again, it goes back to who's building this. Actually, one more point I'll make is there's also a lot of irresponsible design that we see in this new industry. There's, for example, over 100 zombie killing games in virtual reality, which is different to just watching it on and playing a video game. I was explaining before, I can't remember to who, that this one VR experience there, that's Emma, and that you have to stab this alien, and it's very disturbing. It gave me a visceral reaction to doing this. I felt really disgusting doing it, and it was, but there's a powerful thing, that there's so many people creating this, and there's hardly any education apps. There's hardly any education use because of this lack of diverse industry. It's all locked up in this gaming industry, and that's who's creating it. Anyway, there's so much to say on that. It's a great question.
So Bruce, also, it's just always the case, right? Basically, ethics and policy can't keep up with technology. It never can. I mean, technology outstrips the laws all the time. So for me, the important takeaway is we do need to be out ahead of this, and we need to be at the table influencing policy that's going to influence the ethics of how we implement these technologies in the world. And we have the voice because we're always the people who are closest to our society as it relates to both these technologies and unfortunately, so many of the untoward outcomes in our society, no matter what it is, the opioid epidemic, go on down the list. So I think as much as we need to think about the ethics and be out in front of that, we also need to combine that with the policy front as well, and help educate those people who are going to be out there driving policy or implementing policy that is going to affect our practice.
Yeah. I think from a Microsoft perspective, this is a huge issue that we're tackling. Brad Smith, our president, and Harry Shum, our corporate vice president for Microsoft Research, about a year and a half ago, published The Future Computed, and it's specifically looking at AI and ethical implications across many different industries. With regards to health, it looks at a few different aspects of it. Obviously, privacy and security. The next it looks at is, I wrote a little article on it, but I can't remember what I wrote, so I'm just looking at it. Reliability and safety, fairness and inclusivity, and then the last two pieces are transparency and accountability. So that's from a tech perspective. Obviously, we heard earlier in the week the breach with Capital One. I mean, that is privacy and security and trust is at the forefront of our mind, and so that's something that, from a corporate responsibility perspective, we want to be out in front of, because there aren't any rules or regulations really around this yet. I think we had one other question, and then I want to make sure you guys get to drink and eat.
Hi, I'm Britt. I'm from Hopkins. I'm a current PhD student, and I work with exercise video games with older adults. And my question is, Rick, you had mentioned or advocated for nurses to become more involved in technology. And that's really exciting for me, and I'm sure loads of people in here. If you could pinpoint what particular aspect you would love to see nurses involved, is it coming up with ideas? Is it critiquing current technologies? Is it more research? Is it more business? Where are we needed?
I think all of the above. That's it. All of the above. I was talking to Kristen about how all of her learnings would be so invaluable to the creation of something, that can actually help learning and development. And just collaboration there. It's like what she knows I could never know, you know, and this sort of thing, I could gain so much from it, and we could inform a product design. I'm just thinking, you know, off the cuff, so much better, and that involves, yes, previous learnings, but then also future testing for things that haven't been created yet. It involves a whole range of things. I think one of the barriers, which I'm going to harp on about again, is this bias that people don't want to be involved in. Oh, it's not my area, I'm not a technologist. Or often I get it from, we get people who don't want to try the virtual reality. It's like, oh, it's for younger people, you know. And often the people who are most interested in this tend to be the ones who actually do end up trying it on and go, oh, that was easier than the computer, that, you know. So yeah, I think just the willingness to get involved is really important. And I think all areas that people can contribute, which that they can, you know, they know their own problems. We don't.
If I might follow on to that too, I think Rick and I, coming out of the entrepreneurial world, would agree that it's not about a finite piece of pie. It's how do we get the right people to the table to make the pie bigger for everybody? And so we need not be scared of collaboration. Oh my gosh, you know, the competition is doing X. No, they're not my competition. They're my colleague. We're out here trying to make the world a better place. And so we need to do that together, whether it's between our institutions or between partners like Rick's company and other companies that are out there. And let's get all on the same side of the table instead of being on opposite sides of the table, and we can do amazing things together.